On the positive side, let's acknowledge that this does represent a de-escalation. We escalated first in the United States with the tariffs. China reciprocated. Then we, put more export controls on things like, as you mentioned, the chip design software and the jet engines and ethane. China reciprocated with, its own export controls on things like critical minerals, rare earth elements. And now we've taken those down, right? So tariffs are down on both sides, and we've removed really, I think, all of the restrictions on the export controls, although China still retains, licensing power over those rare earths and critical minerals. So that's the good news. The bad news is that there's really nothing to this because, this was all created by the Trump administration since it came into office. There's actually no forward movement represented in this framework deal in terms of advantaging U.S. firms in terms of market access or new opportunities for Chinese firms to engage in the U.S. market. So that's why I say this is, mostly political gamesmanship at this point. I mean, we can hold out some hope that there will be a real trade deal of some actual substance sometime in the future. But for now, we created a mess and now we've basically cleaned up that mess.
So let's talk about a real trade deal or actually something substantive coming out of this other than raising a lot more money from tariffs, right? And I want to bring in your backstory here because it's pretty interesting. Hoover for a long time, CFR before that, but you took about, 2-3 years off a couple of years ago, right, to work for a senior advisor to the former Commerce Secretary, Gina Raimondo. And that was under the Biden administration. And that was the CHIPS Act, that was the IRA, that was about industrial policy, and USTR sort of took a back seat. Right now, though, with China, I'm not hearing anything about rebalancing trade. I'm not hearing anything about changing the way that they manage their economy. Why is that? It's all about tariffs.
I mean, that was in the sort of first Trump administration with Ambassador Lighthizer. I did hear that part of the reason that he was not excited about the opportunity to come back for a second Trump administration was that kind of real negotiation to try to get China to change the way that it does business in terms of its subsidies, in terms of its, non-tariff barriers to, market access. That was not really going to be part of what this Trump administration was going to, focus on. And so what we've seen exactly is this, focus exclusively on the bilateral trade deficit and on these tariffs. I mean, for President Trump, everything can be solved by tariffs. We're going to reshore manufacturing. We're going to punish the BRICS. We're going to, basically do everything we can with tariffs, bring back manufacturing jobs, raise money, the external revenue service as opposed to the internal revenue service. So I think that's what he's got in his head, and that's what the administration is focused on.
So, Liz, you look at the politics of this or the geopolitics of this as well. Where does this all leave national security? On the one hand, we're tariffing these guys, not doing much else, and we're selling them GE aircraft engines, commercial engines, and selling them chip design software again. But what do we know about the circle of people around the president right now and where they stand on national security with regards to China? Are things the same or not?
It's honestly quite difficult to tell. I think when we had now Ambassador Hegseth as the National Security Advisor and Secretary of State Rubio and Defense Secretary Hegseth, that triumvirate basically was a pretty traditional Republican internationalist grouping. And so you had the sense that they were not as strong as the sort of national security group in the first Trump administration, people like Secretary Mattis or H.R. McMaster. But you knew that their orientation overall was, China hawk and, really focused on promoting work with our allies and partners. Now, Waltz has been moved to, ambassador to the UN. Secretary Rubio is in charge of the NSC and the State Department. The NSC has been hollowed out. And Secretary Hegseth, people seem to be running around, within his Defense Department saying things that the president seems to be unaware of. And so everything seems to be, quite frankly, rather discombobulated. There's been no real articulation of a national security strategy with regard to China. What we know is the administration has said it has two priorities. Number one, top priority is border security, and number two is the Asia Pacific. That suggests that China continues to be viewed as our greatest, long-term strategic challenge. But again, this really has not been articulated. And if you look at what we've been doing on the trade front with our allies and partners, and if you look at the language and the rhetoric that's come out of this administration about, what Japan and South Korea and the EU need to do in terms of enhancing their defense spending and our lack of commitment potentially to NATO and to our Asian allies, I think it's fair to raise questions about the real commitment of this administration. So, I think that it hasn't gelled yet. I think where this administration is going with its national security strategy, and there's a clear delinkage, frankly, between what they're doing in the trade front and what they think they're going to get from our allies and partners on the security front. So, I think TBD at this